Welcome to the Ambitious Sloth podcast. I'm Julian, and I interview people from all around the world about their mindsets, ambitions, and meaning in life for you, so you can learn from them or just get a different perspective on things you haven't thought of before. I'm very excited for today's guest, Colin Wright. We talked a lot about his purpose in life, his sense of direction, his lifestyle of being a minimalist and traveling throughout basically the whole world. And a couple of bits he mentioned during the podcasts were which things do I actually want and which things was I told to want. Well, then another one, get more underwear, sell your computer and get more underwear. How to break out of current conventions and norms. By traveling can help to find your purpose. Benefits of traveling and the campsite rule. So that's something you're interested in. Please stay tuned for the episode with Colin Wright. Enjoy. Colin Wright is next to being on most TEDx speaking gigs he did, also an author of 19 plus books. He couldn't even tell himself really properly how many it was. Also podcast host of Let's Know Things. And one of his remarkable or usually a bit thought-provoking things he's doing, he's a minimalist and traveling a lot through a bunch of different countries and still doing that every 4 months on base on the opinions of other people where he should go. So thanks and welcome for being here on the show and the podcast on The Ambitious Sloth.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was first off really amazed and surprised that you so quickly answered to that email that I just wrote you after watching a couple of your TED Talks. And that what you also didn't know before is that this was also an initiator for this second season. I'm publishing, I'm recording this and tomorrow is the second season going to be published. And because I then realized, this can be a really cool and big thing. So thank you.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for being this initiator without knowing.
Oh, thrilled to hear that. That's fantastic. Good on you.
And now I'm obviously really curious obviously, let's start with the first part of the minimalism. How did you start with that, and what was like the driving trigger there that where you got the energy from to just, okay, let's do this, and that's the right thing for me right now?
Yeah. So when I started getting into the concept, it actually wasn't something that I had a name for. It was a little over 10 years ago, actually, and I was living a very different life from what I'm living today. I was living in Los Angeles, running a branding studio, experiencing a type of professional success that I'd always dreamed of, had that young entrepreneur career thing where I'd run several businesses and started when I was 19, and here I was 5 years later at 24, and everything was going splendidly if you just looked at my CV. But in every non-CV way in my life, a lot of things were very imperfect. And I had some great big clients and was making way more money than I thought I'd be making. But I also had no time for anything outside of work ever, including sleep. With my girl, we lived together and we never saw each other. My health wasn't doing great because I had no time to eat well. I had no time to work out as anything other than like a means of trying to exhaust myself to try to fall asleep for a couple of hours. It wasn't really a sustainable lifestyle. And I had the opportunity actually on my 24th birthday to take the first vacation of my adult life. I hadn't stepped away from work or school for 5 years. And I was able to leave Los Angeles and to set aside work mostly for the better part of a week. And from that distance, I was able to see all of these things, that this was not a sustainable way of living. This was success according to certain standards, but not my standards. Like I wanted other things in life, and I told myself I would get around to those things someday, but probably decades in the future. And looking at things from that big picture view, that God's eye view, I was able to recognize, you know what, if I invested myself in other things, if rather than just trying to make as much money as possible and trying to be prestigious and successful according to certain businessy standards, if I worked hard at trying to free up time, at trying to do work that I cared about, at trying to be healthy, at trying to be happy, I could probably accomplish a lot more and do some of these things while I'm young rather than waiting until I'm older. Because no matter how much money I had in the bank, if I had $1 billion sitting in my checking account, that would not buy me my 20s back, or my 30s, or my 40s, or any amount of time that I spent doing this stuff that wasn't really fulfilling me. It didn't matter how much money I had at that point. If I got to that point where I woke up someday and realized that I never lived and never got around to doing all those things. So here I was at 24, and I had the opportunity to pivot a bit, and I did. And what that involved at first was figuring out what I actually wanted to do, which was not something that I had really allowed myself to consider up until that point. And I realized the thing that I'd backburnered, that I'd set aside until later, that was like a really driving force behind everything else that I wanted to do, was to make sure that I had time. I had the freedom of time to spend my energy and time and resources on work that wouldn't necessarily earn me money, that I thought was cool, that I thought would help me grow, that I thought was interesting or valuable in some way. I wanted to be able to travel around and see the world. I had wanted to travel since I was a little kid, and here I was with all this money, but I'd never left the country. And I didn't think that I probably would be able to for a very long time because I didn't have any time. And I wanted to make sure that I could double down on actually feeling good and feeling fulfilled and healthy, not losing my motivation, still wanting to grow, but definitely being happy with what I've got now.
That almost sounds like a midlife crisis at the age of 24.
Like, yeah, the
what I've
quarter-life
done
crisis
with my life so far, worked all the time, but I want to live.
But instead of going and buying an electric bass and a Cadillac, I decided that I would streamline and try to scale things down so that I could travel, so that I could afford to travel sooner rather than later, so that I could reshape my life in such a way that I could afford to do this consistently, rather than a lot of people that I'd known at that point had traveled for a while and then run out of money and had to come back to the lives they were living before with just less money, but everything else the same. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make sure that it was structurally sustainable. So a big part of that was figuring out how to go through what I had in my life already. And that included possessions, but it also included the work I was doing, the expenses that I had, everything, and figuring out what was actually serving me, what was actually valuable, what actually added to my life, and what I was doing out of habit or reflex, or because somebody else told me I was supposed to want it at some point, whether that was an advertisement or a professor or some mentor or something. This is what you're supposed to want. Well, which things was I told I was supposed to want, and which things did I actually want?
That is an amazing question. Yes.
It's something that we're not really encouraged to ask, because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of incentives out there to keep people wanting the stuff that you want them to want. I mean, I worked in branding. I know this better than most people. Like, it's your responsibility in a lot of fields to convince people that they need a thing, a widget or a service or whatever, or they will be less than if they don't have it. And getting past that is a process, and it takes time. So the first step for me was taking the time to go through my stuff and my life and to figure out which of these things do I like and which of these things am I telling myself I like.
These are really some things I want to push on people, like these questions, like think about things you actually enjoy, think about the stuff you think are worthwhile or worth doing and suited to you, because everybody else is having their own things, like their own vision of how the future or how their own life looks like. And then also at some point I was, like the past couple of months, years, realizing, okay, all the things I was trying to do better are still the things that have been told, even though it's like personal development things, but it's still the things that other people told me instead of listening to myself.
Maybe especially within the world of personal development and even wellness and things like this, mindfulness, meditation. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we're being sold on within these ostensibly healthy and wellfulness oriented things as well. So, I mean, really, there's no shortcutting it. What you have to do is step back, take a moment, look at your life, really ask yourself difficult questions. And it may be that the answer is, I don't know.
That's
and
a
that's
good
okay.
answer.
But I mean, what that means is that then you're saying, okay, I don't know, but that also means that all this stuff I'm working on, I don't know if that actually serves me. Maybe I should experiment. Should try some new hobbies, meet some new people, try some new foods, go to some new places. That is a free pass. That is a perfect excuse to start experimenting with your lifestyle. Read a book about a subject you know nothing about. Try a new hobby. Go to a meetup group for archaeology or painting or something that you've never tried before. Try it. Go out and discover yourself. That's exactly what you should be doing at that moment. And the same is true even if you already have something, because that means this thing that you knew about already you haven't been acting on. What else have you not been acting on? So it's all a great opportunity for self-exploration. I think there's no bad time to take a moment and pause and give yourself the opportunity to do that. And then ideally, we regularly do this throughout our lives and are constantly able to then take what we've learned since the last time we did it and see who we are now. So the beginning for me of my minimalist journey, if you want to call it that, was that essentially taking a look at these things. And for a lot of people, that then eventually led to me getting rid of some stuff, a whole lot of things that I'd accumulated that I didn't need. For me, though, I didn't go into it thinking I'm going to be a minimalist. I'm going to get rid of stuff because nobody was talking about this stuff really. I didn't know there was this name for it. I later found out there was somebody writing about it. The only person on the internet, as far as I could tell, writing about minimalism was Leo Babauta on Zen Habits. And I discovered him probably 3 or 4 months after I started writing about the subject. And then somebody said, "Oh, so you're a minimalist?" And I said, "Yes, that sounds right. I mean, maybe, I don't know." And then I read his stuff and I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. Well done. Okay. Yeah. So almost always the case. If you think you're brilliant and discovered something, chances are somebody else already did it, maybe thousands of years ago, as is the case with minimalism, but also perhaps blogging about it several years ago. So that was kind of the beginning of my process where I started to discard things because those things, one, were not serving me. Two, they were part of a habit that I had to buy things to make myself feel like I was accomplishing something. These were signs of success to me, and getting rid of them helped me recognize that they didn't actually do anything for me. But also they were standing physically in the way of me doing something that I truly did care about, which was travel. And I wanted to get rid of everything that wouldn't fit into a carry-on bag because I did not want to have a storage facility somewhere full of stuff that I was hoarding like Pharaoh, not because I was using it, but so that no one else could have it, burying myself with my riches. No. I gave away the vast majority of it and to people who can actually use it. That way, I wasn't taking valuable things and then holding on to them despite the fact that they were not valuable to me. I was giving them to people who could actually use them. And that extra computer that I never used, those nice clothes that I never wore, somebody would actually use those things and they would be truly valuable to them. It's just that for me, they were not. They were the opposite. And so part of the process was recognizing that I could shift that value elsewhere to a place where it would actually make the world better for it existing.
What was one of the things that were the most difficult to give away or to sell, even though you knew it wasn't supporting your lifestyle?
For the first year, better part of a year at least, maybe not a full year, that I was on the road, I carried around 2 laptops, which was actually a step down. I had 8 computers all to myself when I lived in LA for some reason.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why either. But then I also had this walk-in closet full of clothes. And so when I traveled, I kept a really nice tailored suit also tucked in my bag, thinking I'm going to feel like such a fool if I'm traveling around and I need a really nice suit and I don't have it. So I'll keep this one suit rather than all the other nice clothes that I had. I'll get rid of those, but I'll keep this one suit. Never used it. Never used the second laptop. Of course I didn't. Why would I need to? Somehow, just because I didn't know about travel, I had never left the country. I didn't know what I would need. But also I was clinging to this idea that having more of these things actually made sense and that there was some value in it. And as it turned out, actually, it was far more valuable to have that extra bag space to spend on something else that I would actually use.
And what do you usually then spend on your extra backspace? And like when you travel something, you take on like some
More underwear.
accessories, or I don't know.
More underwear, definitely. I mean, it's usually super practical stuff that will make you the happiest. And if you have more underwear, you do not have to wash your clothes as often. You won't have to go and find a washer. Yeah.
I do know the feeling, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
This is amazing.
Reinvest that computer money on more underwear and you will be much happier.
That's the highlight of the podcast. The one thing you should take out of this is sell your computer and get more underwear.
Sell your computer, get more underwear, I'm telling you.
But your journey like continued, or like you still, I mean, you said, oh yeah, please share the vivid image you told in the pre-talk of the compass on how you're living your life at the moment, or like how it's directed. I think that's super valuable.
So basically, I mean, for everybody, when you're going through this process and trying to figure out what's important to you, essentially all you can really do is head in the right general direction at first, because chances are you don't know with great specificity where you actually want to be. And if you think you do, you're probably wrong, because you're acting on incomplete information. You know, ask a 20-year-old me what I wanted to do with my life. And that 20-year-old me was a lot more ignorant about what I would actually want to do eventually than 34-year-old me. I know I have 14 more years of experience than that guy. So of course I know with better resolution where I would like to actually end up. And that's the case with all of us. At first you're headed like north or west, or like, you know, some generic direction. But as you move further and further and further along, you get tinier and tinier increments on your compass that you're following. And it's more and more important, all the little blips, all the little lines on the compass, because you're seeing life with greater resolution. You're seeing those goals with greater specificity. You're seeing your own ambitions, but also the potential options with greater specificity, because you've lived more and you also know yourself more. And as you get closer and closer, that will be more and more the case, where you'll have a better idea of what very specific direction you want to move in. But it's also important to continuously check in on that too, to check your magnetic north to see if something's changed. Because ideally, if you're continuing to grow, that direction that you're headed will continue to change, because you will change as an individual. And if you have the same goal from age 10 until age 40, that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, you could say, hey, kudos for consistency, but that probably also means that you haven't learned anything dramatically different or seen the world from a radically different angle. And if you do, then you'll change your mind over time and change your goals over time, and that's great.
Thank you. That was awesome. Yeah, I do think that this is a really valuable perspective, because like, at least for me, it was most of the time the me trying to really figure this thing out now properly, so I can continuously go on this and don't have to think about this anymore and can like move on to other stuff. But this is just not the case. I tried it so many times.
I know. And that's why sometimes the pursuit of efficiency of a certain type can actually be the least efficient thing you can do, because you're acting on old information in a lot of cases. Or in some cases, you optimize toward metrics that are not the right metrics. So you optimize toward earning as much money as possible, not realizing that in order to do so, you will eliminate every other positive thing in your life in a lot of cases. Optimization is only as good as the logic that goes into it. Just like algorithms. Like, you can code a perfect piece of software, but it will only do what you tell it. And if you're putting in bad information to begin with, any optimization strategy or life hack that you have will probably be imperfect by some other metric. And that's why no matter how much you think you have it together, checking in on a regular basis to check that math, to see if the variables that you put in place are still vital, if those are still the important things to you, super, super important.
And I just presume this traveling is helping you a lot with that. To all the time reiterate your thinking, reiterate your values, your perspective in life, isn't it?
Yeah, something that I tell people quite often, because I meet a lot of people who don't like traveling, and they're like, well, so how do I, if I don't like traveling, how do I benefit from that? And the thing is, you don't have to travel to get any of the benefits of travel. There's a lot of things that travel makes easier, and that travel forces you to deal with constantly. discomforts. It forces you to see the world from different angles. You have no choice in that. It forces you to be around people who grew up in different environments, who have very different cultural backgrounds, different expectations, different sets of goals. It forces you to experience a great deal of valuable frictions. Like, that's something that you cannot avoid with travel, and that's part of why I think it's valuable. But you can experience the same thing staying in your own hometown. It just takes a whole lot more work. You have to be a lot more conscious about it, a lot more intentional about it, and you have to consciously force yourself to do very difficult, uncomfortable things. And so while it's possible, it's also a very good idea, even if you don't like travel, to periodically take a road trip to the next town over, like do some version of travel that allows you to experience these things more consistently. Because otherwise, and I've done this, it's just exhausting, the amount of effort that it takes to get that same type of external perspective, that same type of three-dimensionality in the way that you view the world, if you're holding still in everything. It doesn't, geographically, there's travel. There's also travel professionally. There's travel in terms of philosophy and relationships. There's so many different ways that you can expose yourself to new things. So I don't want to make it sound like travel only means taking a train or a bus or a plane somewhere new. You can travel intellectually. But if you're sticking around in the same place, surrounding yourself with the same friends, thinking the same thoughts, rereading and rewatching the same books and TV, like if you're surrounded by the same external factors and variables constantly, you're going to have to put in a hell of a lot more work if you ever want to expand your horizons than somebody comparable who happens to take a trip to another country or who regularly exposes themselves to new types of film and books and such.
I can just agree with that. Whenever it almost feels sometimes whenever I'm traveling, I'm a different person. I'm a different parts of my personality are just like lit up, and oh, now my curious mind is lit up and like, oh, this is a weird plant. Let me touch this. The inner child is coming up when I'm traveling a lot more than when you're usually in your, I need to now go from this point A to point B and to do this and that. You're not thinking, or you're not active in, okay, what's there on the way? How can I experience this still? But this is happening, at least to me, while I'm traveling. My mind is just open to anything what's there.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons for this. There's actually been research on it. And it's a lot of completely different factors that lead to that feeling, that sense. But it's a very real thing. One, because you're pulled out of your typical rhythm. You're pulled out of a familiar environment that causes you to go into habitual behaviors. But it's also something, apparently, where being away from familiar people and familiar norms allows you then to disrupt your norms because you don't know what the correct way to be is. And thus, you're a little bit less concerned with making an ass of yourself because you don't even know. You're definitely going to make an ass of yourself. And so you just kind of lean into it more, and thus you make more valuable mistakes. So when you move aside from conventions that you understand, like it changes. Actually, if you live in a new place long enough, then eventually you fall into the same thing that you did at your old home. But when you're exposed to something new, you're in a new place, then you are no longer enmeshed in those conventions and rules that you fully understand. And that lack of understanding kind of puts you in the child's mindset again, where you're open to learning because you don't know how much you don't know. You don't know what's right and what's wrong. And as a consequence, you kind of just do.
Yes, I definitely felt that way when I went to Hong Kong. I was completely like,
I imagine,
what the hell is going on here? I need to figure out everything. Yeah, that was, I really love that. This is an awesome feeling to experience everything from, either you call it beginner's mind or the child's mind or whatever, to like just really be open to even, I don't know, a butterfly flying by and you just like, oh, this is so beautiful. What?
You do pick up on different things too,
yes.
Because when you're in a new environment, the parts of your brain that are familiar typically with what's going on in your environment, the threats and opportunities that it's always attuned to and pays the most attention to, the threats and opportunities in your environment are typically quite well known. And thus you're not necessarily pulled out of your everyday reverie. And so you don't collect as much visual and other sensory information as you do when you're in a new environment, where all the threats and opportunities, or most of them, are unknown. And so all the colors are brighter, the smells are more intense, things stand out more. Whoa, what? Which of these things will kill me? Which of these things can I procreate with? Like that's what your brain is trying to pay attention to constantly, the primitive part of your brain. And so you actually do collect more information, and as a consequence, remember things more vibrantly. when you are in an unfamiliar situation. And a lot of people who don't travel very often and then go on a trip, they feel like suddenly their memory works better when they're away from home. And actually, that's literally true. It's your memory is working better because you're collecting more sensory information, and memories stick when you have physical sensory information to attach it to other parts of your brain. So that's another benefit of travel, is that it allows you to pay closer attention to what's happening in your environment, and potentially then what's happening within you at the same time as well. That's why we very often have these deep realizations about ourselves and the way that we're living our lives and what we're feeling when we are away from home, outside of all that habitual living.
And let me ask, like, what is the most important realization that you had during traveling?
That's a tough one. It's tough to choose just one.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially everything that I believe, I don't know if that's 100% true, but most of the most important aspects of what I believe that guide my actions today are the consequence of having separated myself from habit and routine and the optimization for certain outcomes in order to be in a place that's less perfect and a lot messier and more chaotic. And then I have a realization that, oh, wow, everything was going very, very well according to this standard, but I actually want this. So from the very beginning, leaving LA, and then every single year along the way, I've had at least a half dozen major, oh, holy crap moments where I've realized that I've been doing something that I could be doing in a better way, better as defined by what I actually care about and the outcomes I want to see. One of them, strangely, this is a really, really, truly random thing, but I realized partway through living in Argentina that I didn't mind being nice. And like, there's something, especially I think within like masculine culture, where you have to be like a badass. You have to be a little bit scary or mean or what. And I'm like, I'm not though, like there's aspects of it that want you to be a hard ass, especially within business. I found you had to kind of pretend to be a sociopath sometimes. And for me, I like doing well by people. I like helping people out. I like being a nice person, like going at it. Like it's something that makes me feel better when I'm able to be that, because that feels most normal and correct to me. So when you're able to align yourself ideologically with what you actually care about and what you believe, align your actions and your beliefs, you sleep a lot better. But it's also something that makes you feel more yourself all the time. So that little stupid, silly thing where I gave myself permission to not pretend to be a badass and not pretend to be mean and sociopathic and like the typical entrepreneurial archetype or anything, I felt so much better and life got so much easier. And it was just a consequence of a random little thought that I had while on a long bus ride between one city and the next city.
That is almost ridiculously like simple and plain, that this is like, oh yeah, I'm traveling in Argentina, and on the bus ride this thought suddenly comes up and you're like, oh yeah, I should change my life now.
It's a simple, silly, stupid little thing. And a lot of people probably come to that type of realization sometime earlier in their life, but for a lot of reasons I hadn't. And so
I think also a lot of people come to that a lot later in their life.
Potentially, yeah, or something like it. Maybe they come to the realization, I've been too nice. I need to be a bad person. And hey, if that's your truth, I guess go for it. But for me, it was the opposite.
Yeah, and you said also in the beginning that a lot of you try to align your values on to make your actions and decisions align. What are some that you think are for you the most important, that you really, okay, this is from me, the most important values, so I try to align most of them, most of the things and actions I do towards them?
There's a lot of these too. Well, so I try to adhere to what I call the campsite rule, where I try to leave the world, but also people that I come into contact with better than I found them, if possible. Bare minimum, leave them. Don't hurt anybody or anything if you can avoid it. Don't be a drag on anybody's life. But if you can, even if in some little tiny way, leave people better than you found them. Leave the world, leave a particular place better than you found it, if possible. That to me is something that makes me feel very good, but it also then overarchingly, ideologically, makes me feel like, okay, hey, life then has this purpose that isn't destiny and it's not required by anybody, but it's something that I want to do and feel good doing. I also like to do I like to do work that I can believe in. And that's something that will mean very different things for every single person. But I've had several small businesses in the past that I've run that have done okay monetarily that I could have scaled up. And then I got like 6 months into it and realized that I didn't want to tell anyone about it because it made me money, but it wasn't adding anything good to the world. It was just a way of earning money. And I've gotten much better at kind of smell testing these things before I get into them now, because there's a lot of things that might be good according to certain standards. It might help you earn revenue. And if you can justify that, okay, cool. For me, though, I've realized that that justification comes with a cost. And at a certain point, it starts to be a drain on my day, a drain on my life. I don't feel good about what I'm doing. So I like to make sure that the way that I'm spending my time is something that I feel very confident telling people about, and even happy telling people about, because it's something that I truly believe in and can be truly invested in. And so that the work is something that I enjoy, but also the outcome is something that I get to feel good about.
That is also something I really, for me, it started mostly in the past year, that I also was a lot more certain for myself that, for example, now I'm certain I want to go in the direction of coaching and want to, as basically almost as I just learned the campsite rule applying to people, and since I really was convinced for myself, had this realization just like literally at the dinner table with a friend, oh, this is my thing apparently, because I was doing this all day long already with other people, but didn't realize that I was doing it. And since then, not only was it a lot more fun for myself, but also I figured a lot of people, when they see this little fire or spark in your eye, they help you achieve that. After this realization, so many people came into my life that from meeting on the airplane, sitting next to them, and I'm still in contact with them and helping me out on some parts, to other friends referring me to, oh, I know this dude and or person, and she's doing exactly what you do right now, and let's connect you with her. And those amazing things happened since then. This is, I think, also really the strength of finding something that you really fired up, and this is might be actually the true value in not looking for the monetary part in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, so don't get me wrong. I do think it's important to be able to pay the bills. And that's something from a very realistic level. You need to make sure that what you're doing is sustainable. But I mean, there's multiple ways to do that. I know people who most of them are visual artists or performing artists who do this, who have a job, like working at a coffee shop or working at a library, like doing something that they actually enjoy an aspect of it, even if it's not their passion. But then they look at the money that they earn from that as a means of funding the art that they want to make, because they do not want their art, be it a painting or theatrical performance, to be adjusted or slanted in some way by considerations for money, because money will slant some things. You start to change your art because it sells better if you do it this way. They don't want to even have to think about that. So they become their own Medici, their own patron, by working a job. And then they look at that money that they're earning as a way of sustaining themselves, keeping a roof over their head and food on their table. But it's also a way that they get to self-fund their own passion. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. I think it's wonderful if you can create something that allows you to make some money, but also allows you to create something that you believe in. But that won't always be in the cards. And if not, I think it's perfectly legitimate to find something that you do not hate doing, and ideally that you enjoy, at least on some level, and that hopefully adds something to the world too. Hopefully it's not drilling oil wells or, clubbing baby seals or something. I probably don't do that to fund your art. But if you can find something that you enjoy decently well that also allows you to be your own patron, I think that's glorious as well, if you can figure out how to make that work.
I totally agree. Yes, because also, especially in the part when you try to give something to other people and then need to consider, I need to also get this person to pay me. Then you almost immediately commercialize it. You almost immediately try to get the most out of this person, even though it's almost conflicting that you want to give something positive, but you also want to receive immediately, because otherwise you cannot sustain yourself.
It creates weird incentives. And even if you have the best of intentions, it can create perverse incentives that then adjusts, even if subconsciously, the way that you behave with other people, the way that you behave with what you're creating. So, every once in a while it works out. Like I feel very good about having, or I feel much better at least about having customers over clients the way that I used to. So being able to sell books. And then with the podcast, I actually tried having sponsors at first because I didn't want to have advertisers, but I thought, well, maybe if I reach out to people whose products and services I use myself and feel very good about promoting, that would work. And I did that for several months. And then I thought, actually, this doesn't feel right either. And so I went straight patronage using Patreon and PayPal and things like that. And it's doing pretty well. It's not something that it replaced my income for anything else, but it is something that is more than self-sustaining and something that I feel good about. How much that scales, I don't know. And how much that would work for other types of projects, I have no idea. But we all have the opportunity, I think, to experiment with these sorts of things. And I don't think that there's an illegitimate way of monetizing a project or funding a project, so long as you're not taking advantage of anybody, there's no coercion involved, and as long as you are doing something that you actually care about, that you think the world benefits from having this thing in it, and you're able to make it sustainable in some way so that you are not wringing yourself dry and putting yourself out on the street in order to do it. Because you definitely want to make sure that you sustain psychological and physical health for yourself as you're creating these things as well. You don't want to be the starving artist if you can avoid it.
But also now, like how you say it, it's also like how I basically do it, that it seems like for us quite easy, because we have we're in a way quite nicely put in this world, let's say it like that, and we have quite a security base, and we can afford also to, I want to put something nice in the world and don't want to immediately get something in return. But you can only do that when you already have a backup.
It's a privileged position, and it's not something that everybody will be able to do out of the gate, or if ever. I mean, it's unfortunate. It's truly unfortunate. I've seen different permutations of it, but it really is like, if you are, just putting it out there, if you are born white, male, straight, English speaking, like there's a lot of different things. If you have a passport that allows you to travel, I know tons of people who would love to be able to travel, but they happened to be born into a place where their passport doesn't allow them to go most places. It's a highly inequitable world, and the same effort will not result in the same outcomes for everybody, for anybody, really. We all get dealt very different cards, and some of us got fortunate to be dealt a pretty good hand and probably didn't play it as well as we should have, but at the same time, we still got good cards, so we can afford to fail and stand back up and fail and stand back up with less effort than it would take somebody else. Not everybody has the benefit of failure, and not everybody has the benefit of saying, I'm going to wait until I've got a job that I'm passionate about. And that's why I usually say, all of these things are steeped in kind of fuzzy words. This is not the absolute best way to do anything, because everybody will get different outcomes. Everybody's coming from a different circumstance. It's a lot of the general concepts work very well, I think, for most people. The idea of working toward being able to fund something that you can enjoy, or figuring out a way to fund something that you enjoy, in large part because then you'll be less psychologically drained and have more energy to spend on things. But I mean, hell, there's certain places that you could grow up and just being able to get an income is a really remarkable achievement. So everybody does what they have to do. If you do have to club baby seals to make a living, there's literally no other way to do it. I do not look down on you for that. You're doing what you can.
Yeah, I just really wanted to put that in perspective, that this is just such a privilege, but not only seeing that other people have it worse, but also then actually appreciating and seeing how good it is. So you take actually advantage of that, because most people in our circumstance and our surroundings have those privileges, might not see them or might not take advantage of them to make something positive, good for their surroundings or for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, using what you've got, and recognizing too that not everybody who's dealt the same hand is going to have the same outcome either. So just because you were born into a wealthy country and have a good family and everything doesn't mean that everything will be easy. I think very seldom are useful things easy, but you might get a different outcome from somebody else, and that's totally okay too.
Yeah. But also what I previously already thought about is when you now travel to so many different countries in such a short period of time, how's your social environment? Because I mean, you meet so many new different people in such a short period of time, and then you're gone again. Like that is not how we usually build up our relationships.
It's a very, very different sort of relationship building environment. The nice thing, though, and what I usually tell people is that this would have been way more difficult 40, 50 years ago for a variety of reasons. One, there's way more vaccines today. That's nice. But also, I mean, it's relatively easy to travel, all things considered. It's relatively safe to travel a lot of places, all things considered. But also, we live in the future. We've got Skype. We've got mobile phone technology. The phone plan that I have allows me to get free data and free calls in like 150 countries without having to swap out a SIM card. It's way different from even how it was a decade ago. Yeah. There's things like Airbnb, there's Uber. A lot of these things have significant downsides, but even the most fundamental things are a hell of a lot easier than they were even a decade ago, not to mention 20 or 30 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of keeping in touch with people and building relationships, as long as you recognize that it will not look exactly the way it does if you're living in the same town your entire life. So you're not going to see all of your friends every single day. You're not going to have weekly meetups and play board games or have a drink. You're not going to run into people because you happen to sit at the cubicle or office next to them or sit at the desk next to them. That's not how it works. You actually have to go out of your way in order to stay in touch with people, to communicate, to figure out how often you want to communicate, to figure out the best way to communicate, to figure out what needs to be said actively and what you can do to stay in touch or stay aware of each other passively, and then touch base when it makes sense for both of you. So it's figuring out, or it's being more intentional, I guess, in terms of like the different orbits that your relationships exist on, because you're going to have in that center very close orbit probably a handful, maybe a dozen people tops, because there's only so much time, so much energy that you can spend on talking to people and staying in touch and engaged with people on a regular basis. It's the same way that it works in real life too. It's just that you're doing it perhaps using different technologies and communication methods. And then other people figuring out how you stay in touch, how often you communicate, how often you have an actual call, if text messaging is enough, sending emails, communicating on social media. Every single one of these tools has the potential to be horrible, but it also has the potential to be incredible. And it just totally dependent on how you use it. It's just like a chainsaw, like you could use a chainsaw to cut down a bunch of stuff and build yourself a beautiful sculpture or a house, or you could use a chainsaw to go on a killing spree. And the same is true in a lot of cases with social media and anything else that allows us to communicate that could drag our attention away from the important stuff, or could allow us to stay in touch with the important people. So figuring out what you actually want to do with these tools is a big determination or a big determiner of how valuable the tools will actually prove to be.
And so everything you've explained now seemed really logically thought through and really almost like meticulously thought about and pointed out, almost written down somewhere.
It helps to write about this kind of thing and speak about it for 10 years. Because then even if you're just going off the cuff, you generally know.
I believe so. But then like even more interesting to me then, are you generally that person that is really that thoroughly thought through, or are you also at certain situations a lot more the person who is just do what it feels like, being that going with the flow person? Does that also exist, this Colin?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's a bit of both. And I think most ideally, it's a bit of both for all of us, because there's certain things that you want to be structured with. And it's a very good idea to be rational with a great many things, including a lot of things that we typically romanticize as things that we should be emotional about. It helps to be a little bit stoic in situations where emotion might otherwise overwhelm you and cause you to make very bad decisions or hurt somebody or something. It's a good idea to be aware of what you're feeling and then be able to process that before you respond to that thing that you're experiencing. Yeah. But it's also important to allow yourself to experience it. So it's one thing to acknowledge I am feeling angry or upset or stressed out or something. It's another thing to just go, I'm feeling stressed out, and then go crazy and then go self-medicate or something. It's much better to be able to but then also consciously and rationally acknowledge it before making a decision about what you do in response to that. Mm-hmm. So I think ideally what you have, the way that I envision it at least, is you have like a structure that is very rational stuff. That is the structure for your life and the way that you process and think. But then within that, it's just whatever. It's wild and crazy. You fully feel every emotion, and you make sure that you continue to do so, because if you ever stop, you're missing out on a great deal of what life has to offer. And that includes acting spontaneously and allowing yourself to go on gut sometimes, but also acknowledging that your gut is trained by experience and thoughtfulness and knowledge, and you can train your creative processes as well by using some of these rational tools. So like a lot of things, they work much better together rather than choosing one end of the spectrum or the other.
Okay. And now, since you said you didn't have so much time, I want to get into the end of this podcast with an important question. What do you want to be remembered for?
You know, it's not something I think too much about. Over a long enough timeline, it's unlikely any of us will be remembered. I mean, just being realistic.
Yes.
You know, in the short term, I mean, if I'm going to be remembered, honestly, I don't think that I need to be in order to feel like I have meaning in my work or my life. But if I am remembered for something, I'd much rather it, I guess, be something positive than negative. So it'd be nice to be associated in some way with living well, dealing with each other honestly, being able to see the inherent personal and social value in being intellectually involved, in being conscious of each other and of ourselves. A lot of what I spend my time on these days is trying to help people understand what's happening in the world and how that affects them, and the best ways that we can deal with all of that information externally and internally to then make better decisions and figure out who we are, what we actually care about, and how to behave based on that information. So something correlated to that would be nice, but ultimately, again, like, I think I would drive myself crazy. And I think a lot of people do drive themselves crazy with that kind of dynastic thinking where I need to be remembered for this and I need to make sure I do something dramatic and crazy. And imagine how stressful that is to think I need to do something titanic, otherwise my life will have been worthless. No, I think you can have a million little valuable instances where you've benefited a lot of people in very, very tiny ways, or one person in a little tiny way, or bare minimum just didn't hurt a bunch of people. And I think that's a type of success in terms of living.
Another short question. What superpower would you like to have if you could choose any?
This has changed over the years. Yeah, there was a time where I thought it would be so cool to be able to go anywhere in the world and speak to anyone and be fully and completely understood and to understand completely in return, not just linguistically. And I'm actually terrible with languages. This is part of why I always believed this, but not just linguistically, but also in terms of intent. So what people say, but also what they mean, and then being able to have perfect communication. I think that would be such a valuable thing. And as opposed to all the superhero stuff that has tons of fighting, you would avoid so much of the fighting if we all just understood each other. But more recently, I actually thought it would be amazing. And this is more recently, as of probably like 15 years ago. I thought it would be really cool to be able to step out of reality into a pocket universe that has all the information you could possibly want to know. And this is me thinking in terms of storyline, it would not be the best version of this type of superpower, but it would be very compelling, I think, because there's a dramatic element to it. You step into it, you have all that information, but you don't get access to it immediately. You have to take it in the way that you would in real life. So you step out of the world and time stops for you. When you step back in, time will have stopped and you're right back where you started. But in here, you have unlimited time to read whatever books you want, watch whatever documentaries you want, take in information, but you have to put in the time to get that information. To me, that would be such a compelling type of superhero character. And for me, part of the reason I've tried to give myself time to deal with all day, every day, to make sure I have as close to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week as I can to do whatever I want, is because it's something that approximates that type of power, to be able to learn anything. Like really, with enough time and the desire to do so, you could learn just about anything. It doesn't mean that you'll be the best at it, but you could learn just about anything. And I love that concept, the fact that all of us actually do have that power. We don't have pocket universes in which to experience it.
That is, I guess, one of the best endings I had so far. This is amazing. I love this story. Yeah, I could really see the spark in your eye. That was, you were really immersed in the story.
I thought about that maybe too much.
Well, if anyone liked anything what you just said, and I'm sure there will be some people out there, Colin Wright is basically reachable anywhere in the internet where you search Google or Instagram or whatever, on the exile lifestyle. Do you have any other most important doors people can step into getting in contact with you or connect or listen to stuff?
Yeah, Colin.io is kind of the central hub for my books and my other publications. And then Let's Know Things is my podcast.
Yes, that is amazing and super deep, interesting information I have never thought about. That was.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, like some of the topics ranging from like the what was it, battery technology towards some wool of sheep, whatever. Like it's completely off the topics. Those things, and interesting to, yeah, as you said, like before, having this travel, this mentally or literature travel almost into different parts you haven't thought about, and that's actually what you do with the podcast, as it seems, at least to me.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. That's the intent, is to try to make this information interesting and show people how what's going on in the news connects to everything else. All the stuff that has happened, stuff in other fields of inquiry, all of it's interconnected if you allow yourself to see the connections.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for listening to this episode, and I hope to see you or listen to you in the next one. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Again, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, because after this episode I was really pumped and energetic and wanted to dive deeper into topics and find the purpose really for myself, find things that I'm curious about, and just spark this beginner's mind, this child's mind, to explore more and find out more. So this is something I really enjoyed throughout the whole episode, and having a lot of additional bits into my mind that spark like things I wanted to think about, things I had to rethink, like which things was I told to want, which things do I actually want. The funny thing about getting more underwear, which is just like practicality, is sometimes really key and can give you a lot of important joy and happiness. But really also to a main key takeaway for me is really to change your environment, change your perspective, to really find this curiosity, spark some new thoughts, think about stuff, explore yourself. What do you actually want? Those were really some valuable thoughts for me, and I enjoyed the interview with him. It was really a mix between fun and curiosity and learning. I hope you saw it similar and could take something out of this too. If you like what he said, obviously you know his channels, Let's Not Think, his podcast, the website he mentioned. So yeah, reach out to him, talk to him. He immediately answered my email, so yeah, he will be open to talk to you too. And I hope to see you soon again. One last thing, if you enjoyed this episode or got a new perspective on something, I would really appreciate if you subscribe or leave me a review on iTunes, so I know what I'm doing and I can improve it. And I also see a bit of support from you to keep going. That would be awesome. So have a nice day, and Namastè.